Millionaire CEO found a resume hidden inside a coffee cup and walked away. What if your greatest act of desperation became your greatest miracle? A single mother, working herself to exhaustion, hid her resume inside a coffee cup and threw it away. She had given up. She thought no one was watching, but someone was. And what happened next changed everything, not just for her, but for her daughter, and for hundreds of families who would never know her name. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a story of invisible prayers, unexpected angels, and the moment when surrender became salvation. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, and Sarah Mitchell's hand shot out from under the thin blanket to silence it. The room was still dark. The world was still asleep, but Sarah had no choice but to rise. She sat on the edge of her bed for just a moment, letting her feet touch the cold floor, reminding herself that she was still here, still fighting, still breathing. In the next room, her 9-year-old daughter Emma slept peacefully, curled under a quilt that Sarah's late husband had bought 6 years ago, back when life was different, back when they were a family of 3. Back when the word tomorrow didn't feel like a threat, Sarah stood and moved quietly through the small apartment. She had learned to be silent in the mornings. Emma needed her sleep. School started at 8, and Sarah wouldn't be there to wake her. Mrs. Grabowski from downstairs had agreed to check on Emma before school, a kindness Sarah repaid by babysitting Mrs. Grabowski's grandson on weekends. Everything in Sarah's life was a transaction now, a careful balance, one favor for another. One shift covering the rent, another shift covering the utilities, a third shift trying to save something, anything, for Emma's future. She pulled on her waitress uniform, a faded blue dress with a white apron that had seen better days. The diner didn't care about appearances as long as you showed up and smiled at the customers. Sarah had become an expert at smiling when her heart was breaking. Before leaving, she stopped at Emma's door. She pushed it open just enough to see her daughter's face in the dim light from the hallway. Emma looked so peaceful, so innocent, so unaware of how close they were to losing everything. "I'm doing this for you, baby," Sarah whispered. "I promise it'll get better." But even as she said the words, doubt crept in. How long could she keep this up? How long before her body gave out? How long before Emma started asking the questions Sarah couldn't answer? The diner was a 20-minute walk from their apartment. Sarah couldn't afford to fix her car. It had been sitting in the parking lot with a broken transmission for 3 months. She'd gotten used to walking, even in the rain, even in the cold. The pre-dawn streets were empty except for the occasional delivery truck. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter and walked faster. The diner opened at 5, and she needed to have the coffee ready, the table set, the morning specials written on the chalkboard. Pete's Diner wasn't fancy. It was a single-story building with cracked vinyl booths and a counter that had served breakfast to factory workers and truck drivers for 40 years. But it was work, and work was survival. "Morning, Sarah," Pete called from the kitchen as she walked in through the back door. "Morning, Pete." Pete was 67, round-faced and kind-hearted. He'd given Sarah this job 2 years ago when she'd walked in, desperate and newly widowed, with a resume that listed a business degree she'd never been able to use. "You look tired," Pete said, flipping pancakes on the griddle. "I'm fine," Sarah lied. She tied her apron and started the coffee. The familiar routine steadied her. Scoop the grounds, fill the pot, press the button, wait for the rich smell to fill the diner. By 5:30, the first customers arrived. Hank, the construction foreman who ordered scrambled eggs and rye toast every single day. Dolores, the night shift nurse who drank 4 cups of black coffee before heading home. Jimmy, the young mechanic who always left a $3 tip even though Sarah knew he was barely getting by himself. These were her people, the invisible ones, the ones who worked while the world slept. "Coffee, Hank?" Sarah asked, pot in hand. "You know it, darling." She poured, smiled, moved to the next table. Her feet already hurt, but she had 6 more hours on the shift. Then she'd go home, check on Emma, make her lunch, and head to her afternoon shift at the grocery store. If she was lucky, she'd be home by 9 tonight. If she was lucky. At 7 o'clock, during a brief lull, Sarah stood behind the counter and allowed herself one moment of stillness. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her resume. She printed it last week at the library, spending 75 cents she could barely afford. She unfolded it and read her own qualifications. Bachelor of Business Administration, 3 years of corporate experience before Emma was born. Skills in management, analytics, client relations. All worthless now. No one wanted to hire a 34-year-old woman with a 7-year employment gap. She'd applied to 43 positions in the last 6 months. 43 rejections. Sarah felt the sting of tears and blinked them back. Not here. Not now. She looked down at the resume, then at the empty coffee cup on the counter a customer had just left. An idea formed. A desperate, foolish idea. She folded the resume carefully and slipped it inside the empty cup. Then she wrote on a napkin, "For whoever finds this, I'm still here. I'm still trying." She dropped the napkin into the cup, walked to the trash can, and threw it all away. "Dear God," she whispered, "if you're listening, I need a miracle." Then she went back to work. Marcus Thornton was not supposed to be at Pete's Diner. At 58 years old, he was the CEO of Thornton Industries, a manufacturing empire worth $3.2 billion. He owned homes in 5 cities. His calendar was managed by 3 assistants. His mornings usually began with conference calls to Singapore and London, not with pancakes at a roadside diner. But Marcus had learned long ago that the boardroom didn't teach you about people. The street did. Once a quarter, he did this. Left the penthouse, left the suits and the security, and visited the neighborhoods where his company's factories operated. He wore regular clothes, he drove a regular car, and he listened. Today, he'd chosen Pete's Diner because it was across the street from one of his facilities. He wanted to know what the workers ate, where they gathered, what they talked about. He wanted to understand the community his business affected. He slid into booth 7 and picked up the laminated menu. A waitress approached, brown hair pulled back. Tired eyes. Genuine smile. "Good morning, coffee, please." She poured without spilling a drop, even though Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly. Exhaustion, he thought. Or maybe something deeper. "I'm Sarah. I'll be taking care of you today. The breakfast special is 2 eggs, bacon, and hash browns for $6.95. "I'll take that." "Over easy on the eggs. You got it." She walked away, and Marcus watched her work. There was a grace to her movements despite the obvious fatigue. She refilled coffee without being asked. She laughed at an old man's joke. She cleaned a spill before anyone slipped. She cared. You could see it. Marcus ate his breakfast slowly, observing the diner's rhythm. Pete worked the grill with practiced efficiency. The customers were mostly blue-collar people who worked with their hands, people who counted their dollars. When Sarah brought his check, Marcus left a $50 bill for a $7 meal. "Sir, I think you made a mistake." "No mistake. You're working hard. Thank you for the service." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I can't." "You can. Have a good day, Sarah." He stood and walked toward the door, but something caught his eye, the trash can near the counter. A piece of paper was sticking out from an empty coffee cup. Curious, Marcus glanced around and carefully pulled it out. A resume, folded neatly. Sarah Mitchell, Bachelor of Business Administration, corporate experience, skills that belonged in an office, not a diner, and a handwritten note on a napkin. "For whoever finds this, I'm still here, I'm still trying." Marcus stood there holding the resume and felt something shift in his chest. He'd seen desperation before. He'd seen people struggling, but there was something different about this. Something raw and honest and heartbreaking. He looked back at Sarah. She was wiping down a table, unaware that he'd found her hidden message. Marcus carefully folded the resume and put it in his jacket pocket. "Mr. Davis," he said quietly to the man sitting near the door as head of security, who'd been sitting separately watching. "Sir, I need you to find out everything you can about Sarah Mitchell. Quietly. Respectfully. I want to know her story." "Yes, sir." Marcus walked out of the diner, but his mind stayed behind. He built his fortune by recognizing potential that others missed, by seeing value where others saw only struggle, and something told him that Sarah Mitchell's story was far from over. Emma Mitchell sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the envelope. She'd been staring at it for 10 minutes, ever since Mrs. Grabowski had brought up the mail. The return address said, Riverside Academy. Emma knew what that meant. 3 months ago, her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had helped her apply for a scholarship to Riverside, a private school with small classes, art programs, and a science lab. A school where kids like Emma, kids who loved learning, could actually thrive. Emma's hand shook as she opened the envelope. Dear Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your application to Riverside Academy's scholarship program. We regret to inform you that due to the high volume of qualified applicants, she didn't need to read the rest. Rejected. Emma folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. She wouldn't show her mother. Mom had enough to worry about. Emma was 9 years old, but she understood more than adults realized. She understood that her mother worked 3 jobs. She understood that their car was broken. She understood that sometimes Mom cried in the bathroom when she thought Emma was asleep, and Emma understood that she couldn't add to that burden. The apartment door opened, and Sarah walked in, her face gray with exhaustion. Hey, baby, Sarah said, forcing a smile. How was school? Good, Mom. Sarah dropped her purse on the counter and immediately started making dinner spaghetti again, because pasta was cheap and filling. Mom? Emma asked quietly. Yeah, honey? Are we going to be okay? Sarah's hand stopped moving. She turned to look at her daughter, and Emma saw something break behind her mother's eyes. Of course we are, Emma. I promise. I'm going to make sure of it. But that night, after Emma went to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and opened the bills. Electric, past due. Rent, due in 5 days. Medical debt from Robert's cancer treatments, overwhelming. She had $312 in her checking account. Rent alone was $900. Sarah put her head in her hands and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the quiet tears she shed in the shower. Real sobs that came from a place so deep she thought she might break. How had it come to this? She'd done everything right. She'd gone to college. She'd married a good man. She'd worked hard. And still, the universe had taken everything from her: her husband, her career, her stability. Her phone buzzed. A text from Pete. Sarah, I'm sorry. I have to cut your hours. Business is slow. You'll work 3 shifts instead of 5 starting next week. Sarah stared at the message. 3 shifts. That was half her income from the diner. She was drowning, and someone had just cut the rope. The next morning, Sarah's car finally gave up completely. She turned the key and heard nothing but a click. She tried again. Click, click, click. No, she whispered. She called a mechanic, $800 to fix the transmission. $800 she didn't have. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the steering wheel. She thought about the resume in the coffee cup, the prayer she'd whispered, the silence that had answered her. Maybe miracles didn't happen to people like her. That afternoon, while Sarah was at her grocery store shift, Emma came home from school to find an eviction notice taped to their apartment door. Notice to vacate. Failure to pay rent within 5 days will result in eviction proceedings. Emma pulled the notice down before anyone could see it and hid it under her mattress. She sat on her bed and made a decision. She would write a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to whoever might listen. Maybe someone would care. Maybe someone would help. She pulled out her notebook and began to write in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. My name is Emma Mitchell. I'm 9 years old. My mom works 3 jobs to take care of me. She's the best mom in the world, but she's tired and sad. She tries to hide it, but I know. We're going to lose our home. I don't want my mom to feel like she failed. She didn't fail. She's the strongest person I know. If anyone can help us, please. I don't need toys or games. I just need my mom to be okay. Thank you. Emma folded the letter and put it in an envelope. Tomorrow, she would find a way to mail it. To whom, she didn't know. But she had to try. Marcus Thornton received the report about Sarah Mitchell on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat in his office on the 42nd floor, looking out over the city, and read every detail. The information was thorough but respectful. His investigator knew that Marcus wanted facts, not intrusion. Sarah Mitchell, age 34, widowed. Husband Robert died of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, leaving behind medical debt exceeding $200,000. Daughter Emma, age 9, honor roll student. Sarah works at Pete's Diner, Riverside Grocery, and occasionally cleans offices on weekends. Current financial status, critical. Behind on rent. Car inoperable. No family support system. But there was more. The investigator had included character references, voluntary statements from people who knew Sarah. Pete from the diner. Best employee I've ever had. Shows up early, never complains. Treats every customer like family. Mrs. Grabowski, neighbor. Sarah watches my grandson without charging me. She baked cookies for the whole building last Christmas, even though I know she couldn't afford the ingredients. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Peterson. Emma is brilliant, kind, and mature beyond her years. Her mother has raised an extraordinary child under impossible circumstances. Marcus set down the report and looked at the resume he'd kept, the one from the coffee cup. He ran his finger over Sarah's qualifications. She could be running a department at his company. She could be shaping strategy, leading teams, making a real impact. Instead, she was pouring coffee and counting pennies. The system had failed her. And Marcus had built his entire philosophy on one principle: when the system fails, people of means have a responsibility to act. But he also knew that charity could wound pride. He'd learned that lesson years ago when he'd tried to simply hand someone money and watch them refuse out of dignity. This required thought, strategy, respect. Marcus picked up his phone and called his head of HR. Jennifer, I need you to create a job posting. Director of Community Relations. Requirements: business degree, strong interpersonal skills, ability to connect with diverse populations. Salary range: 75 to 90,000. I want it posted internally and externally by tomorrow. Yes, sir. Are we filling this because of the new community initiative? Exactly, Marcus said. The community initiative he'd just decided to create. He hung up and sat back in his chair. Phase 1, create a legitimate opportunity. Phase 2, make sure Sarah heard about it. Phase 3, let her earn it. Because Marcus didn't want to rescue Sarah Mitchell, he wanted to empower her. Over the next week, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He went back to Pete's Diner. Not once, but 3 times. He sat in different booths, watched Sarah work, and saw something that the report couldn't capture. He saw her slip an extra biscuit to an elderly man who clearly couldn't afford more food. He saw her stay 15 minutes past her shift to help Pete clean up after a rush. He saw her smile genuinely at a crying child and make the little girl laugh. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just surviving. She was maintaining her humanity in the midst of crisis. She was still kind when kindness cost her energy she didn't have. On his 3rd visit, Marcus overheard a conversation that changed everything. Sarah was talking to a younger waitress, a girl who looked about 20. I can't pay my tuition, the girl was crying. I'm going to have to drop out. How much do you need? Sarah asked. $300 by Friday. Marcus watched Sarah's face. He knew from the report that Sarah probably had exactly $300 to her name. That $300 was probably the difference between making rent or facing eviction. I'll lend it to you, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, no. Yes. You're going to finish school. You're going to build a better life. Take the money. Pay me back when you can. The young waitress hugged Sarah, sobbing with gratitude, and Marcus knew he was witnessing something rare: selflessness in the face of personal catastrophe. That evening, Marcus made a phone call to Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher. He explained that he was a philanthropist looking to help promising families and that Sarah Mitchell had been recommended to him. Would Emma's family benefit from some educational support? He asked carefully. Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Mr. Thornton, I don't know who recommended Sarah to you, but yes, Emma is exceptional, and Sarah is. She's drowning, but she won't ask for help. If you can do anything. I'm working on it, Marcus said. He hung up and looked at the job posting his HR department had created. Director of Community Relations. Perfect credentials. Good salary. Benefits. Now he just needed to make sure Sarah applied. Sarah almost didn't see the flyer. She was walking past the community center bulletin board, exhausted from her morning shift, when a piece of paper caught her eye. Now. Hearing. Director of Community Relations, Thornton Industries. bachelor's degree required. Experience in business, communications, or community development. Salary, $75,000, $90,000 to dollars plus benefits. Sarah stopped walking. $75,000. That was more than she'd made in the last 2 years combined. But it was impossible. Jobs like that didn't go to people like her people, with gaps in their resume, people who smelled like coffee and bacon grease, people who were one crisis away from homelessness. She started to walk away. Then she heard Emma's voice in her head. "Mom, you're the smartest person I know." Sarah turned back and pulled the flyer down. At the bottom, it listed an email address for applications. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her laptop, a 6-year-old machine that took 5 minutes to start up. She opened her resume file and stared at it. What did she have to lose? She updated her resume, wrote a cover letter explaining her employment gap honestly, and attached both to an email. Her cursor hovered over the send button for a full minute. "Please," she whispered, "please let this be the one." She clicked send. 3 days later, Sarah received an email. "Dear Miss Mitchell, thank you for your application. We would like to invite you to interview for the position of Director of Community Relations. Please reply with your availability." Sarah read the email 5 times to make sure it was real. She replied immediately. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday at Thornton Industries headquarters, a gleaming building downtown that Sarah had passed 100 times but never imagined entering. She borrowed a blazer for Mrs. Grabowski. She polished her only pair of professional shoes. She practiced answers to interview questions while walking to work, and on Monday morning she put on her best outfit, kissed Emma goodbye, and took 2 buses to downtown. The lobby of Thornton Industries was intimidating: marble floors, modern art, people in expensive suits moving with purpose. Sarah felt completely out of place. Sarah Mitchell, a professional woman in her 40s, approached. "I'm Jennifer Kim, Director of Human Resources. Thank you for coming." Sarah shook her hand, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The interview lasted an hour. Jennifer asked about Sarah's background, her experience, her vision for community relations. Sarah answered honestly. She talked about her years in corporate before Emma was born. She talked about the diner and how it had taught her to connect with people from all walks of life. She talked about community, real community, not the theoretical kind discussed in boardrooms. "Why do you want this position?" Jennifer asked. Sarah could have given a polished answer. Instead, she told the truth. "Because I have a 9-year-old daughter who deserves better than watching her mother work herself to death. Because I have skills and education that are going to waste. Because I want to prove to my daughter that hard work and hope actually matter. And because I genuinely believe I can make a difference." Jennifer smiled. "Thank you, Sarah. We'll be in touch within the week." Sarah rode the bus home, her heart pounding. She'd done her best. That was all she could do. 4 days later, the call came. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Kim. I'm pleased to offer you the position of Director of Community Relations. Your starting salary would be $80,000 with full benefits, including health insurance. Are you interested?" Sarah sat down hard on the edge of her bed. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm very interested." When Emma came home from school that day, Sarah was crying. Emma's face went pale. "Mom, what's wrong?" Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms. "Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's right. I got a job. A real job. We're going to be okay." Emma started crying too. Really? They held each other and cried tears of relief, of exhaustion, of hope, finally fulfilled. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the resume in the coffee cup, about the prayer she whispered, about the impossible chain of events that had led her here. She didn't know it yet, but Marcus Thornton had been watching her journey. He'd created the position for her. He'd made sure she saw the flyer. He'd been the invisible hand guiding her toward this moment. But he'd also made sure the job was real, that Sarah would have to earn it, that she would succeed on her own merit. Because the greatest gift wasn't charity, it was opportunity. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in her office at Thornton Industries looking out over the city, her office with her name on the door. She still had moments where she couldn't believe it was real. The job had been everything she'd hoped for and more. She'd created partnerships with local schools, established scholarship programs, and built bridges between Fortin Industries and the communities they served. But the best part? She was home for dinner every night. Emma's grades had improved. They'd moved to a better apartment. Sarah's car was fixed. The medical debt was being paid down in manageable chunks. They were breathing again. One afternoon, Marcus Thornton himself stopped by her office. "Sarah, do you have a minute?" "Of course, Mr. Storm." Thornton. He sat down, and for the first time, Sarah noticed something familiar about him. She'd seen him before, but where? "I wanted to tell you something," Marcus said. "6 months ago, I was having breakfast at Pete's Diner. I found a resume in a coffee cup." "Your resume?" Sarah's face went white. That was you?" Marcus nodded. "I saw your qualifications. I read your note, and I wanted to understand who you were. So I watched you respectfully from a distance. I saw your character, your kindness, your strength, and I created this position because I knew you'd be perfect for it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You did all this for me?" "No," Marcus said gently. "I created an opportunity. You earned everything that followed. You came to the interview. You proved your capabilities. You excelled in this role beyond anything I imagined. I didn't give you success, Sarah. I just opened the door. You walked through it." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. 25 years ago, I was working 2 jobs to support my mother. I was exhausted, broke, and ready to give up. A man I'd never met gave me a chance, an entry-level position at his company. That one opportunity changed my entire life. I built this company on one principle: success should create opportunity for others. He stood up. "You deserved a chance, Sarah, and now I hope you'll pay it forward." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I will, I promise." And she did. Within a year, Sarah had created the Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping single parents access education and employment. She partnered with companies to create flexible jobs. She established childcare support. She created resume workshops and interview coaching. Everything she'd needed when she was drowning, she now provided to others. Emma, now 10 years old, volunteered at the foundation's events. She'd write encouraging notes to children whose parents were struggling, because she remembered what hope felt like when everything seemed lost. One day, Sarah received a letter. It was from the young waitress she'd lent $300 to a year ago. The money Sarah had needed for rent, the money that could have saved her from eviction. "Dear Sarah, I graduated last week with my nursing degree. I got a job at County Hospital. I'm enclosing $300 what I owed you. But I'm also enclosing an extra $300. I want you to give it to someone else who needs it. You taught me that kindness creates ripples. Thank you for being my ripple. Love, Rachel." Sarah sat in her office and cried, good tears this time. That evening, she and Emma went back to Pete's Diner for dinner. Pete hugged them both. "Look at you two," he said, beaming. "I knew you'd make it, Sarah. I always knew." They sat in booth 7, the same booth where Marcus had sat a year ago. Sarah ordered the breakfast special, even though it was 6 in the evening, because it reminded her of where she'd been. Emma pulled out her homework, and Sarah helped her with math problems. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd learned that struggles don't define you. Perseverance does, kindness does, faith does. She thought about the resume in the coffee cup, the desperate prayer, the miracle she'd stopped believing in. Someone had been watching. Someone had cared. And sometimes the moment you're ready to give up is the moment before everything changes. "Mom?" Emma asked, looking up from her homework. "Yeah, baby, I'm proud of you." Sarah smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm proud of us." Outside, the city lights flickered to life as evening settled over the streets. Somewhere out there, someone else was struggling. Someone else was praying. Someone else was hiding their dreams in a coffee cup and throwing them away. But Sarah Mitchell was proof that those prayers didn't go unheard, that kindness existed, that miracles still happened, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to give up. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who hid a resume in a coffee cup and found a miracle. But more than that, it's a story about all of us. It's about the moments when we feel invisible, when we're working so hard but no one seems to notice, when we're one step away from giving up. It's about the people who see us anyway, who choose kindness when they could walk away, who create opportunities because they remember what it felt like to need one. And it's about the ripples we create, the lives we touch, the hope we pass forward, the difference we make simply by refusing to let struggle steal our humanity. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters. And if you're struggling right now, if you feel like you're invisible, like your prayers aren't being heard, please hold on. Your resume in a coffee cup might be the beginning of your miracle. Someone is watching, someone cares. And your story isn't over yet. Thank you for watching.